I'm Calder, 38, and I fix homes in Boston, just not the one I came from. 18 years ago, my dad looked me straight in the eye and said, "Your brother's got a better shot." Turns out they drained my college fund to pay for his wedding, without ever telling me. Now I sit in silence, watching a single beam of morning light fall across the old envelope that held my future. If you've ever been the forgotten one in your own family, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? I stood in the middle of my apartment, hands trembling slightly as they held the creased envelope. Outside the window, Boston's skyline flickered in the quiet dusk, street lamps blinking one by one into life, car headlights weaving between rows of brownstones in Jamaica Plain. The city was winding down, but inside, something in me had stirred back to life. The envelope was beige, brittle at the corners, smudged where my thumbs had once pressed into it. It had survived 18 years inside a drawer I rarely opened. A college acceptance letter from Northeastern University. The letter I never used. The letter that never mattered. I turned it over, reading again the faint pencil scratch on the back. Dream big, see. The words had barely faded. Mrs. Aldridge, my high school English teacher, had scribbled it there when she handed me the envelope during senior homeroom. Her voice was always calm, her eyes steady. She believed in me. She believed when no one else did. The apartment was quiet. No hum of conversation, no clinking of silverware, just the old creak of floorboards and the gentle hiss from the radiator. I sat down at the edge of my worn-out couch, the envelope still in my hands, and closed my eyes. It had been a night like this when I first showed them the letter. We were at the dinner table. Springfield, Missouri. Early spring, maybe late March. The smell of overcooked green beans still came back to me with startling clarity. "Dad," I'd said, trying to sound casual, but my voice had cracked. "I got into Northeastern." He didn't look up from his plate. "You think we're made of money?" he muttered, stuffing a piece of casserole into his mouth. "Your brother's got a better shot. Maybe next year." My mother didn't say anything. She didn't even blink, just passed the salt to him like nothing had happened. I remember nodding once, then cutting my chicken into pieces I never ate. There was no next year funny, how the smallest moments change everything. I wasn't asking them to be rich. I wasn't even asking them to be proud. I just needed to know I mattered, that they believed I was worth something more than leftovers and deflection. Back then, I told myself they couldn't afford it, that it was bad timing, that maybe they were scared or tired or stretched too thin. But now, years later, standing in this apartment I paid for on my own, with degrees I earned through night shifts and community college credits, I knew better. It had never been about money. It had been about priority. I placed the envelope gently back into the drawer. Not because I needed to cling to it, but because it was time to stop pretending it hadn't hurt. My anger had cooled long ago, replaced now by something heavier. Acknowledgement. The kind that sits in your bones and whispers, "Yes, this happened." And it wasn't fair. I wasn't looking for revenge. There was no victory in throwing it in their face, no healing in shouting into a void. Understanding, though, that was different. Maybe this wasn't a wound to be stitched, but a scar to be carried. I stood again, smoothing my palms against the sides of my jeans. The envelope could rest now. So could the part of me that used to wait for an apology that would never come. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. A message from Mom. "Your brother's wedding is in 6 months. Can we talk?" I didn't open it right away. Just stared at the screen, the blue bubble glowing in the dim room. My breath caught. I could already feel it, the way they'd ask, the way they'd spin it, as if nothing had ever happened. as if 18 years could be packed away and sealed shut with one polite invitation. I reached to turn off the phone, then paused. On the corner of the coffee table, half buried under unopened mail, a familiar slip of paper peeked out. The envelope. Dream big, see. I smiled. Not the kind of smile you give to someone else, the kind you give to yourself when you realize you're still here, still standing, still dreaming. Her voice hadn't changed much. That same honeyed tone, like she was speaking to someone else's child, someone she adored. Not me. Never quite me. "You're doing well now, right?" she said, stretching the words like warm molasses. "We were thinking, maybe you could help. Just a little. It's Wyatt's wedding." I was parked in the rental, the engine idling. Outside, our old house on Walnut Street looked exactly as it had for the past 30 years. Peeling shutters, tired roofline, and the same chipped garden gnome crouched under the front hedges like it was ashamed of something. I had flown in for the weekend. February in Springfield was always damp and bitter, the kind of cold that worked its way into your sleeves and stayed there. It was a short trip, just 2 nights, and I hadn't planned on going inside. But the phone call had come earlier that morning. She said she missed me, that she had just a tiny thing to ask. I should have known better, should have stayed in the car and driven straight back to the motel. Instead, I knocked. Inside, it smelled like cinnamon and dust. The kitchen was brighter than I remembered, though not warmer. On the fridge, a neon pink sticky note curled at the corners. 140,000 or bust. My stomach turned. She poured me tea, chamomile, like always. I hadn't drunk chamomile since I was a teenager, but she didn't ask. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, hands folded like we were about to pray. "College was different," she said, eyes darting toward the fridge and then back again. "You know how that was." "How so?" I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. "Well, they're memories, aren't they? College, that's just books." I nearly laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. Books. 4 years of night shifts, ramen dinners, and community college credits patched together to make a degree, reduced to just books. She leaned in a little, tapping the side of her mug. "You've done so well, Calder. Really, we're all so proud. And Wyatt, well, he's always looked up to you." I wanted to ask when, exactly, that admiration had ever taken place, because from where I was sitting, Wyatt had always been the golden child. Prom king, star quarterback, the one who didn't need sticky notes to remind people of his worth. She was watching me now, waiting. That's when I realized this wasn't a request. It wasn't even a plea. It was a performance. And I was expected to clap when it ended. My success didn't belong to me in this house. It was part of the family inventory, like an old heirloom someone had forgotten they owned until it was time to use it again. I looked down at the pink note. $140,000. There was no question of whether I could afford it. No inquiry about my life, my wife, our mortgage, our plans. Just a number. Written in ink, stuck to a fridge like a grocery list. My fingers curled around the mug. Part of me wanted to scream, to ask her if she remembered that day at the table. If she remembered what Dad had said with a mouthful of casserole. If she remembered the look in my eyes when they chose Wyatt before he'd even asked. But another part of me just sat there, still, detached. Like I was watching an old play unfold on a stage I hadn't chosen. She kept talking. About florists and venues and cake tastings, her voice rising and falling like wind over shallow water. I let it wash over me. When she finally stopped, I stood. "I'll think about it," I said. That was all. No, yes. No, no. She smiled, satisfied, as if she'd won something. Outside, the cold hit me harder than before. I sat in the car for a while, hands gripping the wheel, staring at the front porch I used to sneak out from when I was 16. The gnome was still there, half covered in dead leaves. Watching. I didn't drive back to the motel. Instead, I took a left at the end of the block and headed toward the old church. Dad's church. It looked the same. White siding, tall windows, wooden sign out front still crooked after all these years. But today, there was something new. On the side wall, just below the stained glass, someone had scrawled a single word in bright blue chalk. Hypocrite. I parked and got out. The letters were jagged, rushed. Someone had done it quickly, maybe angrily. I stared at it longer than I meant to. Not because it shocked me, but because it didn't. Above it, the church's old bulletin board read, "Families build futures. Together." The irony made my jaw tighten. I didn't go inside. I got back in the car and drove. Somewhere between downtown and the motel, I rolled down the window and let the cold sting my face, just to remind myself I was awake. I gripped the wheel harder than I needed to. They'd asked. But more than that, they expected. And that was the part I couldn't forget. The cafe was the kind of place where oat milk lattes came with latte art hearts, and every tabletop had a tiny fake succulent. It smelled like cinnamon, fresh ground espresso, and too much optimism. I arrived 5 minutes early. She was already waiting. Sierra stood and waved, flashing the kind of smile people usually save for cameras. "Calder!" she sang out, like we were cousins reunited at Thanksgiving. She reached for a hug I didn't expect, and I let it happen. Stiff-armed and short. "You're coming to the rehearsal dinner, right?" she said before we'd even sat down. No question in her voice, just the certainty that I would, of course, fall in line. I didn't bother answering. I ordered a black coffee. No flavors, no foam. She got something with almond syrup, oat milk, and a name that didn't sound like coffee at all. While she talked, I scrolled through the wedding website on my phone. There was Wyatt's face, smiling, tuxedoed, featured front and center with a banner that read, "The Big Day. Wyatt and Sierra, June 12th. There was a countdown clock on the homepage. I had to stop myself from laughing. "Oh, you have to see this," Sierra said, pulling a thick envelope from her bag. "It's the invitation mock-up. Wyatt wanted the cardstock to be elegant but masculine, whatever that means." She slid it across the table, like it was a rare artifact. The paper was heavy, embossed in gold. My name was spelled wrong. "Cauldron," I said, holding it up. "Oh," she giggled. "Oops, the print shop must have misread your mom's handwriting." "Sure, that made sense." I set it down without comment. "He's always been so reliable, hasn't he?" she continued, stirring her drink. "I mean, ever since we started dating, he's just steady, solid, you know?" I nodded, sipping my bitter coffee. "And he talks about you all the time. Said you were his first role model. Isn't that sweet?" I nearly choked. I recovered with a cough and a napkin, covering the smile that wanted to twist into something sarcastic. If Wyatt looked up to me, he'd hidden it well. Unless looking up meant borrowing my bike and never giving it back, or taking credit for the history project I helped him finish sophomore year. But Sierra looked genuinely pleased with herself for having said it, so I let the moment pass. Other guests started arriving, mostly Sierra's friends from college, all in soft pastel sweaters and jeans that cost more than my winter jacket. One of them waved at me like I was the waiter. I smiled politely and took another sip. Then the door opened, and Wyatt walked in. Late. He wasn't even halfway to the table before people stood to greet him, arms open, grins wide. The guy next to me clapped. Someone shouted, "There's the groom!" like we were on a sitcom. Wyatt smiled, casual, like the applause was expected. He tossed his coat over a chair, slapped someone's back, and kissed Sierra on the cheek. I stayed seated. No one noticed. He locked eyes with me eventually, gave me a two-finger wave, like we'd seen each other just yesterday. I nodded back. That was the full extent of our interaction. I stayed another 20 minutes, pushed eggs around my plate, listened to someone describe the themed gift bags for the bachelor party. It's ski lodge chic with a whiskey twist, whatever that meant. No one asked if I had a ride. No one asked if I'd flown in or driven. I left a $10 tip under my untouched plate and slipped out while Wyatt was describing how much the venue cost. His voice carried through the glass as I stepped onto the sidewalk. Outside, the cold snapped at my neck. I stuffed my hands into my coat pockets, half wishing I'd skipped the whole thing. At a stoplight, I pulled out my phone to check directions back to the motel. A new text lit up the screen. From Wyatt. Bro, Mom said you're paying for the venue? That true? Appreciate it either way. No punctuation, no greeting, no question mark, just assumption. I didn't respond. I walked a few more blocks before ducking into a quiet bookstore to get out of the wind. It smelled like old pages and lemon polish. A kid at the counter was trying to convince his dad to buy a graphic novel. The dad looked tired, but he nodded anyway. I wandered to the cafe menu posted behind the counter. Golden pancakes for our favorite guest. I stared at that name too long. Back in the day, Mom used to make Wyatt pancakes every Saturday. Mine were always smaller. She said it was because I didn't finish my food. But I always did. I left without buying anything. Outside, the air felt heavier. Wyatt was still the center of everything. And I was just orbiting. Again. Quiet. Distant. Forgettable. But not forever. You're not crazy, Camilla said, sliding a manila folder across her desk. And you're not alone. The folder stopped just short of my hands. I stared at it. For a moment, I didn't move. The sunlight filtering through the half-closed blinds caught the edge of the brass paperweight beside it, shaped like a heart, but sealed with a lock. Her office smelled faintly of lavender and old books. A candle burned low on the windowsill, next to a stack of binders labeled with names I didn't recognize. There was a warmth here, yes, but also something sobering. The weight of stories like mine, cataloged and contained. Camilla wasn't just a financial advisor. She was something else, an archivist of trauma, a quiet curator of all the messes families pretend don't exist. I opened the folder. Inside were copies of loan applications, bank statements, and a single-page summary from a credit union in Branson. The numbers were neatly circled in red. The signatures at the bottom didn't lie. My parents had co-signed a $140,000 wedding loan. 2 months ago. I sat back in the chair, the air in my chest suddenly thinner. They're liable for all of it, Camilla said gently. They didn't take it in Wyatt's name. It's joint. If the balance isn't paid by June, the house and their retirement accounts are listed as collateral. I flipped the page. There it was, buried in the fine print, but in bold. Failure to meet terms may result in property forfeiture. They'd leveraged everything, and they hadn't told me. They're not just asking for help, I said quietly. They're drowning. Camilla nodded, folding her hands. And from the look of it, they didn't read the terms. Or they did, and assumed someone would save them. My stomach turned. Of course. That pink sticky note on Mom's fridge, $140,000 or bust, wasn't a goal. It was a deadline. I rubbed my thumb over the edge of the paper. My father, a pastor for 3 decades, prided himself on planning for the future. He used to give whole sermons on stewardship and responsibility. Now his name was on a high-interest loan tied to a wedding with floral centerpieces flown in from California. My pulse ticked up. "I'm not on the hook for this," I said. "Legally, I mean." "No," she said, "not unless you volunteer. But if they default, the fallout will be public. You'll be dragged into it anyway." I swallowed hard. I wanted to say I didn't care. That it served them right. That the child who'd been denied tuition, dignity, and space to dream had every reason to watch it all burn down. But part of me, some stubborn corner still shaped like a sun, ached at the thought of their house being taken, of Dad forced to step down, of Mom losing her precious kitchen window view. I looked up. Camilla was watching me, kind but unflinching. "I can represent you," she said, quietly. "Make sure nothing lands in your lap unless you choose it to." I nodded, slowly. "But only if you're ready to dig deeper," she added. "Once we start unraveling this, you'll see things you can't unsee, and you may not like all of it." I didn't answer right away. The brass heart caught the light again. "Camilla," I said, "have you ever wanted to help someone who never helped you?" She leaned back in her chair. "Every day." That night, back at the motel, I sat on the edge of the bed with my laptop open. The TV played some infomercial about copper pans in the background, but I wasn't watching. I stared at the blank search bar for 10 minutes. Then I typed, "Evelyn Reyes, Springfield investigative reporter." Her name brought up articles on local housing scams, predatory lending, and one piece that had gone semi-viral about abuse within a local church. She looked young, sharp-eyed, dangerous in the right way. My fingers hovered over the contact form. I didn't know what I was going to say, not exactly, but I knew the shape of it. I knew there was something here, beneath the sticky notes and sweet smiles and family brunches. Something bigger than me. Something rotting. The cursor blinked. I thought of Camilla's coffee mug, sitting beside the folder on her desk. The quote etched in fading blue ink. "Justice doesn't shout, it files." I took a deep breath, then clicked send. Sunday morning air in the Midwest carried a certain kind of chill. Sharp, but not biting. The kind that made you zip your jacket higher, even if the sun had already broken through the clouds. I parked half a block from St. Mary's Chapel and walked the rest of the way on foot, boots crunching softly against gravel. I hadn't planned to come. But some things pull you back, even when every instinct tells you to stay away. The chapel looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just grown used to spaces that didn't carry this much weight. Inside, the wooden pews were polished but worn at the edges, every hymn book neatly tucked behind the seatbacks. The choir, already assembled in their burgundy robes, hummed through a final warm-up. I slipped into the last pew, unnoticed. At least, I thought I was. From the pulpit, my father stood tall, his white collar sharp against the dark of his suit. He hadn't changed. The same slow cadence in his voice, the same practiced stillness in his hands, as if each gesture had been drafted long before the sermon began. He raised his eyes from the pulpit and looked across the room. I held my breath. "Family," he began, "means sacrifice." The words echoed through the quiet like a stone dropped into water. Some heads nodded. An elderly woman near the front wiped a tear. His voice softened. "It means giving when it's inconvenient, trusting even when it hurts, carrying one another, especially when the load feels uneven." Behind him, the stained glass window glowed in the morning sun. Jacob offering Isaac on the altar, one hand trembling, the other raised in surrender. I stared at it, unable to look away. A father's sacrifice, a son's silence. The rest of the sermon blurred. I caught fragments, biblical allusions, soft-spoken parables, references to community and legacy. But what I really heard was the undercurrent beneath it all. Guilt dressed up in scripture, manipulation wrapped in devotion. After the service, people gathered in small clusters. A few older women offered hugs, one of them squeezing my arm and whispering, "Your daddy's so proud of you." I smiled politely and made my way toward the office wing. He found me first. "You came," he said. I turned, hands in my coat pockets. "Couldn't miss a sermon about sacrifice." He chuckled, the sound low and familiar. "You always did have a sharp tongue." I shrugged. "You always did have a short memory." He ignored the jab. "You've done well, son," he said, tone shifting. "Really well. We see it. We're proud." Then, almost seamlessly, he added, "And now you can help." There it was, no apology, no pause, just a smooth transition from compliment to request. It didn't surprise me, but it still stung. He reached into his coat pocket and handed me a tri-fold pamphlet. "Something we've been dreaming of," he said. "A retreat center. Family-based, healing, faith-forward. We've already got pledges coming in." I opened it. Inside were artist renderings of log cabins, bonfire pits, and a circular amphitheater. And near the bottom, in bold, centered text, major sponsor, Wyatt Merritt. I stared at it. No mention of me. Not even a nod. "You like it?" he asked. I thought about freshman year, scrubbing dishes at the dining hall, falling asleep during lectures because I was working 2 jobs. I thought about Wyatt pulling up to graduation in a new Jeep. "I like the paper," I said, folding the pamphlet and tucking it into my coat. "Feels expensive." He didn't respond, just smiled that church-appropriate smile. "We're having dinner tonight," he said. "Family only. Everyone will be there. Let's talk like men." Like men. As if being a man meant agreeing to the terms without question. As if silence equaled strength. I nodded once, out of habit more than agreement. On my way out, I passed the prayer request box near the vestibule. A wooden cube with a slit at the top, lined with folded slips of paper. Messages to God, or someone close enough. The paint on the front had faded since I'd last seen it. But something new caught my eye, scratched lightly into the wood just beneath the slot. Reyes. I froze. Reyes. My finger traced the grooves as if to confirm they were real. It wasn't deep, but it was deliberate. Camilla's voice echoed in my head. "You may not like everything you find." I stepped outside into the sharp sunlight. The bell tower rang once, loud and low. On the side wall of the church, freshly painted in pale blue, was a new motto. I hadn't noticed it before. Give not only what you can, but what you owe. I stared at it for a long time. Then I walked to the car, the pamphlet burning in my pocket like a secret not meant to be held. The dining table hadn't changed. Same glossy mahogany surface, polished like it was still 1999. Same linen runner with the frayed edge Mom refused to throw away. Even the wallpaper, faded blue with sunflower clusters, looked untouched, like the walls themselves refused to evolve. What had changed was my seat. It used to be by the window. Now I was at the far end, next to the coat rack. The chair wobbled slightly, or maybe that was me. The family prayer bell rang from the kitchen. Its little brass tone echoed through the hall like a cue in a well-rehearsed play. Everyone gathered, Mom bustling with gravy boats, Wyatt fiddling with the sleeves of his dress shirt, Dad already seated like a guest of honor. "Lord," Dad began, "thank you for this meal, this family, this season of celebration." Celebration. I stared at the roast beef in front of me, the overcooked green beans drooping like they'd given up. Wyatt turned toward me, halfway through chewing a roll. "You still take your coffee black?" he asked, voice casual. "Still allergic to honesty?" I said, without blinking. Laughter broke around the table. Nervous, polite, from everyone but me. Wyatt shrugged it off. "You always were the sarcastic one." I didn't respond. I watched Mom refill glasses, her eyes moving quickly, scanning the table like a hostess instead of a mother. Dad cleared his throat. "Let's not make this evening about the past." I lifted my glass. "Don't worry, the past doesn't fit at this table anyway." For a while, we all played the parts, passing dishes, murmuring compliments, pretending. But the silence was thick. The air between bites felt like cardboard. Even the corn casserole couldn't save it. Then came the moment. Midway through the main course, as Wyatt laughed about something Sierra had said at brunch, Mom placed a manila folder in front of me. No announcement, no preamble. I stared at it for a second, then opened it. Inside, a stack of invoices: florist, catering, photographer, venue. All unpaid. The total at the bottom scrawled in red ink, $143,892. There was a sticky note clipped to the top. "We trust you'll do what's right." I looked up. No one met my eyes. I stood up. Not harshly. No slamming chairs, no raised voice. Just the scraping of wood against tile. "You're asking me to fix the wedding you already committed to," I said quietly, without asking if I was even invited. Dad opened his mouth, then closed it. Mom blinked quickly. Wyatt scratched the back of his neck. No one spoke. So I left. I walked through the hallway where my graduation photo used to hang, replaced now by a framed print of Wyatt in a tuxedo, holding Sierra's hand. I passed the living room where the family Bible used to rest open, replaced now by magazines about honeymoon destinations and event planning. I opened the front door. Behind me, the bell they'd rung before dinner still echoed, faint and metallic. Outside, the porch light buzzed faintly in the cold air. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Wyatt. He stopped a few feet back, arms crossed, like he was trying to look casual. "They won't survive without help," he said. I turned, letting the words settle before answering. "Maybe it's time they learn how survival works." He looked at me like I'd spoken in another language. "There are parents, man." I stepped off the porch. "No," I said. "They're your parents now." On the way to my car, I passed the kitchen window. The light inside caught a few magnets stuck to the fridge door. My eyes paused on a faded, curled report card. Mine. An A in English circled in red. Beside it, in Dad's handwriting, not enough. It was still there. I almost laughed, but I didn't. I just drove off into the cold, thinking how ghosts don't always haunt old houses. Sometimes they just keep setting the table. That night, I burned the packet. Not all at once. One page at a time. I stood over my kitchen sink, the overhead light casting long shadows across the walls, the rain tapping the window like a slow metronome. The first page curled immediately, flames licking across printed numbers, vendor logos, and polite, final reminders. I watched as the edges browned, then blackened, and finally collapsed into ash. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about watching something, anything, disappear by my own hand. For once, destruction felt like permission. My apartment was quiet, save for the faint jazz on the record player and the occasional hiss of wet paper meeting fire. I hadn't even bothered to finish the glass of wine on the table. It just sat there, half full, forgotten. A lot like I had been. I picked up my phone, opened the voice memo app, and started recording. "They've made their choices," I said into the mic, "and I'm done pretending I owe them anything. This isn't revenge, it's release." I hit send. Camilla replied within a minute. Just 2 words. "Then let's begin." I sat down at my desk, lit only by the desk lamp's amber glow. The envelope with my Northeastern acceptance letter, still creased and stained, lay to the side. I'd kept it all these years, a totem of rejection, maybe, or just a stubborn memory that refused to fade. The email draft to Evelyn Reyes was already open. Subject line, "This wedding's being paid for with lies." Body, a brief summary. Attached scans of the co-signed loan documents, names, dates, terms, the works. Not everything, but enough to start a conversation, enough to shift the narrative. If someone wanted a perfect family photo, they shouldn't have chosen such a cracked frame. I hovered over the send button for a second. Not in hesitation, just reverence. Then I clicked. It was quiet afterward. Not victorious, not cathartic. Just clean. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. The rain outside had picked up, now a steady drumbeat against the glass. For once, I didn't feel like the burden. I wasn't the forgotten son, the backup plan, the guilt-ridden wallet. I was the man who had stopped apologizing for surviving. My phone rang. Camilla. "I reviewed the loan again," she said. "If it defaults, Wyatt loses his condo. His name's on it, not just your parents'. You sure you're ready for that fallout?" I didn't answer immediately. I looked at the final sheet of the packet, the one I hadn't burned yet. Mom's handwriting in the margin stood out in blue ink. "Don't tell him about the loan, he'll overreact." I almost smiled. "He'll be fine," I said. "He's always been the golden one, right?" There was a pause on the other end. Then her voice came softer. "Okay. Then we proceed." The flames were almost gone now. The last sheet turned to black in seconds, the faint smoke curling up and disappearing through the vent like a secret finally exhaled. I rinsed the ashes down the drain. The sink hissed softly. Back at the desk, I picked up my phone again. One new email had arrived. From pastorjuniormarys.org. Subject: I heard about the article. Call me. No greeting, no signature, just a command. I stared at it for a while. Then I turned off the light. "You think this makes you a man?" His voice hit me like a winter wind, sharp, cold, and deliberate. Not angry, worse than that, controlled. My father had always wielded tone like a weapon, and this morning was no exception. I sat on a worn park bench outside my office building, briefcase still balanced on my lap. The city moved around me, joggers dodging puddles, baristas rushing back with orders, parents guiding kids in strollers. Nobody knew I was sitting in the middle of a war zone. Across the plaza, the fountain gurgled quietly. Its steady rhythm behind me reminded me of childhood Sunday mornings, the calm before the performance. "You're making a scene," he said. "I didn't burn 140 grand on someone else's dream," I answered, keeping my voice low. "Family dreams are your dreams." "No, they never were." I leaned forward, elbows on knees. "You turned your back on me when I was 18. There was silence on the other end. Not static. Silence. That carefully calculated pause he used from the pulpit when he wanted a sermon line to land. But this time, it wasn't a sermon. And it didn't land. "I prayed for you," he said finally. "I still do." "Then pray harder," I replied, "because I'm not coming to save you." A bird flitted across the fountain's edge, dipping its beak into the water. "You don't understand what you're doing," he continued. "This isn't justice, it's betrayal." "You taught me sacrifice," I said. "I'm just living the lesson." Another pause. Then the line clicked. He'd hung up. I stared at my phone for a long time, thumb hovering over the screen, not sure what I'd expected to feel. Triumph? Sadness? I felt still. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the aftershock of something long overdue. The grip he had on my life had finally loosened, and it hadn't required a dramatic speech or a public argument. Just a simple truth, said aloud. The bench beneath me creaked as I leaned back, the morning light catching the etching scratched into the wood slat. If they don't clap for you, clap for yourself. I smiled. My phone buzzed again. Notification: Venmo request from Wyatt. Caption: Can we talk? Of course. Even now, the reflex to ask for money came before any apology, any acknowledgement, just a transaction disguised as an olive branch. Before I could process it, another ping came in. This one, an email. From ereyes@localpost.com, Barjam. Let's talk. I opened it. Your story. It's not just a wedding. It's a reckoning. I want to meet. Soon. ER. I closed my eyes for a second, taking in the cold bite of the wind, the scent of wet pavement, the sounds of a city that didn't care about my past. For once, I wasn't chasing their approval. I was walking away from it. Reyes had a voice like sandpaper and silk, rough where it mattered, smooth where it cut deepest. Let's talk about what wasn't paid for, she said as she pressed record, her voice steady but edged, like she was less interested in sympathy and more in truth. We were sitting in a modest cafe in Worcester. Her choice, not mine. It was the kind of place that hadn't changed its menu in a decade and didn't care about oat milk. Outside, storm clouds stacked up along the horizon, low and dark, like they were eavesdropping. She kept twisting a sugar packet between her fingers as I spoke, not opening it, just bending it back and forth like muscle memory from too many interviews and too many lies. They told the florist you'd cover the rest, she said after a pause, eyes on her recorder. I blinked. I didn't even get a save the date. Reyes didn't flinch. She just studied me, her eyes a shade too sharp for casual conversation. Then, slowly, she nodded. You realize this story isn't about flowers? She said. It was a statement, not a question. No, I said. It's about the assumption. Her eyebrow lifted just slightly. They assumed I'd pay for something I wasn't invited to, I added. They assumed access. To my life, my bank account, my silence. That made her smile, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. You'd be surprised how often that happens, she murmured, almost to herself. She clicked the recorder off. I'll be honest with you, she said. Someone tried to buy me off. My back stiffened. She reached into her bag and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. A typed offer, anonymous, of course, suggesting a donation to her outlet in exchange for editorial discretion on a particular wedding-related story. The language was vague. The message was not. It's got your father's fingerprints all over it, she said. I laughed, bitter and low. It wasn't even disbelief. It was exhaustion. They didn't help me with college, I said. Now they want to buy silence about their golden son's wedding? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Instead, she leaned in, voice softening. This piece will run. I'm giving you a week's notice before it does. Not for their sake, for yours. I nodded. Thank you. She stood, gathering her things with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Then, just as she turned to leave, she stopped. From her coat pocket, she pulled out a napkin, creased, coffee-stained. She laid it flat in front of me, scrawled in blocky handwriting. Ask your mother about the Camp Mason account. Before I could ask what it meant, she was already heading toward the door. I sat there for a long time, watching the wind press rain against the windows, the glass trembling in rhythm. A few minutes later, the waitress brought me the check. It had Reyes's handwriting across the bottom. Family money builds churches and burns bridges. I folded it and slipped it into my coat. There were still a few bridges left to burn. I didn't call Mom. I didn't want another conversation that curled like smoke and disappeared before it meant anything. Instead, I drove 2 hours west, past the bare trees and half-frozen creeks, into the hills where summer once meant freedom. Camp Mason had been closed for the season, but that never stopped the memories. They didn't care about gates or signs or what time of year it was. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled into the clearing. The air was sharp with pine and cold dirt. I left the car running for a minute longer than necessary, sitting there, hand resting on the steering wheel like I needed to brace myself before stepping out. The path up to the cabins was carpeted in pine needles. No boot prints, no sign of anyone in weeks, just the faint sound of wind through bare branches and the occasional creak of something old, remembering what it once was. The cabin we used to rent every summer still stood. Smaller than I remembered. The paint had chipped in long, vertical scars. The door hung slightly crooked. But there, nailed just above the knob, was the rusted horseshoe. Once a symbol of luck, now just a relic nailed to nothing in particular. Inside, it smelled of ash, mildew, and wood left too long to its own quiet. The bunk beds were still bolted to the walls. The small fireplace held a nest of dry leaves, and in the far right corner, under a cracked window, was the old swing set we used to drag out in the sun. Someone had tucked it in for winter like a secret they didn't want discovered. I sat on the edge of the lowest bunk and pulled out my phone. Called Camila. "There's an account under my name," I said. "Mom opened it when I was 14. Said it was for college." Her voice was immediate, steady. "And?" "It's empty." "How long?" "Since 2018, right before Wyatt got engaged." She didn't say anything at first. Then, "They moved the funds?" "They drained them." I hung up and started looking around. There was a cabinet by the fireplace, old, warped. I forced it open. Inside was a leather-bound ledger, dusty but intact, probably used by staff or renters. I flipped through it, and there it was. June 12th, 2018, reserved by Hayes family. Purpose, wedding planning retreat. The ink was faded, but the handwriting was Mom's. Her telltale loop on the H, the way she curled the Y like a treble clef. I took a breath, then another. The kind you take when something breaks. But it's been cracked for so long that the snap feels merciful. I stood in that cabin, once the home of campfire stories, mosquito bites, and marshmallow sticky fingers. I used to lie in that bed and imagine college dorm rooms, scholarships, books with my name in them. But they'd used this place, for something else. I pulled out my phone, snapped photos of the ledger page, the reservation line, even the rusted horseshoe above the door. Then I typed out a message to Reyes. Subject, Camp Mason. They knew. I was about to hit send when my phone rang. Unknown number. I shouldn't have answered. But I did. "It's me," the voice said. It was Mom. Her voice was low, strained. "Don't publish that story." Silence hung between us like smoke that wouldn't lift. I didn't respond. I ended the call. On the cabin wall, just above the bunk bed, I noticed something scratched into the wood, probably by a camper years ago. Some fires don't need matches. And I thought, no, they don't. Some fires just need the truth. She was already seated when I walked into the diner off I-90, the one that still smelled like burnt toast and bleach. Same cracked red vinyl booths, same waitress refilling coffee from a pot that had probably been brewing since Reagan. Mom looked flawless, her hair pinned neatly, lipstick precisely applied. She wore her pearl earrings, the ones she always saved for church, funerals, and high-stakes guilt. Her purse sat beside her like a shield. "You look tired," she said as I sat. "You look rehearsed," I replied. She didn't flinch, just lifted her mug and took a long sip. Outside, traffic roared past. Inside, It was just us and the low hum of fluorescent lighting. I could still see the corner booth where I used to cram for the SATs. She used to quiz me on vocabulary between bites of cold waffles. Words like deference, duplicity, dismissal. "You don't understand what it took to raise 2 boys," she began, hands wrapped around the coffee cup, like it might anchor her to something true. "No," I said, keeping my voice level. "But I understand theft." Her eyes narrowed. "It was never theft. It was investment." I almost laughed. "You invested in the one who failed upward." The waitress came by, dropped off a menu. I waved it off. Mom did too, but more delicately, with a smile that barely reached her eyes. "Wyatt was struggling," she said softly. "You were always fine." "Fine?" I echoed. "Working nights to pay for textbooks, skipping meals so I could keep my internship. That kind of fine?" She looked away. I leaned forward. "You emptied my college fund, lied about it, then used the money to throw Wyatt a retreat disguised as a pity party." Her hand trembled slightly as she set down the cup. "We thought Wyatt had a shot," she said finally. You always had yourself." There it was, the ultimate dismissal, wrapped in something that could almost pass for admiration. Almost. I didn't reply. I let the silence work. Let it press in on her from every corner of that diner, like the weight of everything she hadn't said. For once, I didn't defend myself, didn't explain how I made it despite them. She reached into her purse. "This," she said, sliding an envelope across the table, "is for the article. To make it go away." I looked down. Inside was a check, $140,000, the exact amount they needed for Wyatt's wedding. I didn't touch it. "You could help us, gracefully," she offered, voice trembling now. "We're not the villains here." "No," I said, "you're not villains. You're just experts at rearranging blame." She reached for the check, started to pull it back. Then, without looking up, she whispered, "If you print that story, you're no son of mine." I stood. My hand brushed the edge of the table as I passed, knocking the spoon from her saucer. It clattered to the floor, loud in the silence. I didn't say goodbye. Outside, the air was sharp, the sky turning to late afternoon gray. I stood for a second before heading to my car, watching as the diner's neon sign flickered behind me. Open 24 hours, like some truths you can't unsee. In my pocket, my phone buzzed, a message from Reyes. "Drafts ready, final review before print." I didn't respond. Not yet. Reyes called just after midnight. "It's live," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was something behind it, anticipation maybe, or relief. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just stared at the glowing screen on my nightstand. There it was, in bold on the homepage. The Wedding, the Lie, and the Forgotten Son. The title hit harder than I expected. Maybe because it didn't flinch. Maybe because it told the truth I'd buried under 18 years of pretending I was fine. I tapped the article. The screen lit the room in cold blue light. There were photos, Camp Mason, the church bulletin board, even the ledger entries in Mom's handwriting. Quotes from financial experts, a careful timeline, the check, the voicemail. My voice in print, finally untangled from theirs. By the time I finished reading, my phone had already started vibrating. Emails, texts, calls, some furious, some supportive, all stunned. Wyatt's name popped up first. Just a text. "Why would you destroy us like this?" I didn't respond. I saved it, though. Because that was it, wasn't it? Not, "Why didn't you tell us you were hurting?" Not, "We're sorry." Just, "Why would you expose the lie we were comfortable with?" I sat in the dark for a while, watching the screen fade in and out. A dim light that couldn't be turned off now. not without going backward, not without giving up everything I'd clawed toward. A few hours later, just after sunrise, I went for a walk. The streets were empty, damp from night rain. I passed the old coffee shop we all used to visit after Sunday service, the one with the uneven floor and cinnamon rolls the size of softballs. It hadn't changed. The irony made me laugh quietly. In a town full of people pretending nothing had changed, the only thing that hadn't shifted was the floor under my feet. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then a second call. This one I answered. It was a representative from the church board. "Mr. Halbrook," the voice said cautiously, "we're reviewing Pastor Halbrook's leadership. There are concerns. We'd like your side of the story." I paused. "I already told it," I said, "and the whole town's reading it." They hesitated, then thanked me and hung up. When I got home, Camilla called. No hello, just her voice, proud and amused. "You didn't just burn bridges," she said. "You lit up the whole damn street." I smiled. "You proud of yourself?" she added. "I'm not proud," I replied, "but I'm not ashamed either." And that felt new. I stood at the kitchen sink, sunlight beginning to break through the clouds. I poured a glass of water and stared at the window, not because there was anything to see, but because it helped me feel real. Then a ping. New email. From Caleb, reyesegmail.com. Subject, about your college fund. Caleb. I hadn't heard from my cousin in over a decade. We'd grown up close, until the summer his parents left the church. There had been whispers about disagreement, about money, about Dad. The message preview was short. "There's more you should know. I tried to warn you once. Back then no one listened." I sat down. Read the byline on the article again. By Evelyn Reyes, with contributions from Caleb Reyes. Family. Always messier than fiction. But maybe, just maybe, there was another thread waiting to be pulled. The name on the email froze me. Ellen Dresden. I hadn't heard it in over 20 years. Dad's cousin. A number person. The kind of relative who never raised her voice, just raised eyebrows at family holidays when someone accidentally brought up politics or money. She had always been polite, distant, and careful. Her message was only 2 lines. "I handled the trust. You deserved to know." An hour later, I was sitting across from her in a cramped office above a bakery in town. The building smelled like sugar and dust. The paneling on the walls was that fake wood kind from the 70s, and everything had the quiet of things too old to argue anymore. Ellen looked exactly the same. Silver hair in a tight bun, glasses at the tip of her nose, voice like a school bell. Clear, crisp, impossible to ignore. She didn't waste time. "Your parents opened a college trust for you when you were 10, she said. "I helped set it up. It grew slowly but steadily. Deposits every quarter. Consistent." I nodded, watching her slide a thick yellow folder across the desk. The paper inside rustled softly, like it was trying to apologize in advance. "Your fund was intact until 2018, she said. "Withdrawals started right after Wyatt's engagement." My jaw tightened. "So they lied every time they said they couldn't afford it." She looked at me, no pity, just fact. "Yes, it wasn't inability. It was priority." That line landed harder than anything else. I leaned back in the chair, the arms creaking under me. Priority. It was always Wyatt. Always had been. I'd convinced myself for years that it was about scarcity, that they were just stretched too thin, that maybe I was unlucky with timing. But this was deliberate. She opened the folder. Line by line, deposits, interest earned, years of slow growth. And then, in a clean printout dated July 3rd, 2018, final withdrawal, 137,850. Memo: wedding-related expenses. Ellen looked at me, waiting. Maybe to see if I'd yell, maybe to see if I'd cry, but I didn't. I just sat there, not angry, not sad, numb, like someone who'd just learned that the road they thought they'd walked alone had been paved with pieces stolen from their own future. They used it all? I finally asked. Yes. No hesitation? None that I ever saw. I wasn't consulted before the withdrawal, but I recognized the signature, your father's. I nodded, slowly. They never looked back, I said. No, she replied. I don't believe they did. I took a deep breath. The air in her office felt heavier now, like it was pressing down on me, demanding some kind of emotional response I couldn't quite access. I don't want to sue them, I said after a while. Ellen tilted her head. No? No, I don't want court. I just want the truth. In my hands. That's all. She closed the folder gently and handed it to me. There's a second envelope inside, she said. I debated whether to include it. Back in the car, I sat in the driver's seat with the folder in my lap. Rain had started to tap against the windshield, soft, rhythmic, like a lullaby for the stunned. I opened the folder again, pulled out the envelope Ellen had mentioned. It was smaller, sealed but brittle with age. I peeled it open. Inside was a note. Just one line written in my father's blocky, familiar handwriting. Do not let him find this. I stared at the words until they blurred. Beneath it, clipped to the back, was a folded piece of construction paper. I opened it carefully. A child's drawing. Stick figures. A house. A boy with a red book in his hand. In shaky marker letters, it read, "Me at college." And beneath it, in my mother's cursive, "Future college grad." I closed the folder and rested my head against the steering wheel. Sometimes, the worst betrayal isn't what they did. It's remembering that once they believed you would make it, and still chose not to help. The church parking lot was full. Every Sunday spot taken, even the side gravel ones usually reserved for overflow on Easter. But inside the sanctuary, the pulpit was empty. Whispers floated through the aisles like smoke. Someone coughed. Someone else checked their watch. No organ music played, just the soft creak of pews and the out-of-tune clang of the church bell, off by half a note, ringing slower than it should. I sat toward the back, where the latecomers and skeptics tended to land. Camilla sat beside me, legs crossed, hands still. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. The air inside was heavy with expectation. But the weight wasn't reverence. It was vacancy. Pastor Halbrook, my father, was missing. Not late, just absent. A deacon shuffled down the aisle, pausing when he spotted me. Gray hair, soft hands, Bible clutched to his chest. He leaned in, not bothering to lower his voice. "You shamed him," he whispered. "He built this community." I didn't flinch. "He buried part of it, too." The deacon blinked, straightened. Camilla nudged my elbow. "You don't need to say more," she said quietly. "They already know." I looked around. The faces weren't angry. Not like before. Not like the early days when the article first dropped and my inbox exploded. Today they looked unsure. Not yet ready to name what they felt, but ready to stop denying it. At the front of the sanctuary, the interim elder finally stepped up. "No sermon today," she said, clearing her throat, "but we open the floor for anyone moved to speak." It was an old tradition, one my father had rarely used, too unpredictable, too democratic. Wyatt stood. Of course he did. He wore a pale blue button-down, and that same rehearsed confidence that had carried him through every family dinner, every apology that never really was won. "My brother ruined my wedding," he began, "and with it, our family's reputation. The room didn't react. No one clapped. No one murmured agreement. Wyatt looked around, waiting, expecting something, finding nothing. I stood. Every head turned toward me, but I didn't speak. I sat back down. That silence? It was louder than any sermon, and in it I could feel it, something shifting, like a house settling on its foundations after decades of being tilted. For the first time, I wasn't fighting to be heard. I was letting them listen to themselves. After the service, the church board met. It wasn't formal, just a quiet cluster of voices by the coffee urns. By evening, I got the email. We've asked Wyatt to step down from the family outreach program. The board agrees it's best, given the circumstances. Not because I demanded it, not because I made a scene, but because truth, once spoken, echoes longer than pride. Outside, I stepped into the cold air. The late afternoon sun hung low, casting long shadows across the gravel. That's when I saw him. Dad. Sitting alone in his car, parked under the bare sycamore tree by the chapel steps. He wasn't looking at me. Just staring straight ahead, hands resting on the wheel. He didn't look angry. He looked old. The kind of old that isn't about age, but erosion. The slow, quiet kind that eats away at steel from the inside. I didn't approach. Didn't wave. Some distances aren't crossed in a single step. As I turned to leave, my eyes caught the church bulletin board outside. A misprint this week. Clearly someone had been rushed or rattled. Instead of the usual, "Charity begins at home," it read, "Forgiveness begins with truth." A typo, maybe. Or maybe not. Tuesday evening. I stood at their doorstep, unsure what to do with my hands. I had rehearsed the knock 100 times on the drive over, but when I finally did it, 3 short raps, it sounded hollow. Like the house already knew I wasn't there to stay. It was the first time in 5 years. The porch light flickered before the door opened. Dad stood there in a faded flannel, his face more lined than I remembered. He didn't speak, just stepped aside. I walked in. The living room was dim, curtains half drawn. The TV was on, but muted, some old Western flick casting light across the room like a ghost, pacing. Mom sat on the couch. Her eyes were puffy. No pearls. Her hands gripped a tissue like it might dissolve if she let go. I looked around. The family photo that used to sit on the mantel, us at Camp Mason, smiling under the pines, was gone. In its place, the frame, empty, as if even the picture had left. "You could have just asked me," I said, voice low. Dad rubbed his jaw. "We thought you'd say no." "You were right." Mom wiped her face. "We didn't think it would hurt this much." I sat in the armchair across from them. Not the one I used to curl up in as a teenager. That one had been moved, replaced with something sleeker, newer, easier to clean. There was no yelling, no demands, just silence, and whatever truth was brave enough to live inside it. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the check, the one Mom had slid across the diner table. I hadn't deposited it, hadn't even unfolded it since. I tore it clean in half and set the pieces on the coffee table. "It's not about the money," I said. "It's about the years, about the lies, the expectations, the silence." Dad closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they looked tired, but not defensive. "I'll step down," he said quietly. "Not for me," I replied. "For the community." He nodded once, maybe out of agreement, maybe just relief. The room stayed still for a while, like even the walls were listening. No one filled the space with apologies. No one pretended this was enough. Because it wasn't. But it was something. A start, or an end, or maybe just a truce drawn in the dust. I stood, smoothing the front of my jacket. Mom reached for me, then thought better of it. As I reached the door, her voice stopped me. Do you still see us as family? She asked. I didn't turn around. Depends what you do next. Outside, the evening was soft, cool enough to see my breath in the air. I walked to the car, slower than I expected. As I opened the door, I glanced back once, just enough to see the living room light flicker. Something on the coffee table caught my eye through the window. I hadn't noticed it earlier. A college brochure. One of the old ones from when I was 17. Northeastern's logo still across the top, faded and folded, sticky notes marking courses and dorm options. It had been saved. Not shredded, not burned, just left waiting. Camilla and I sat on the back porch, wrapped in the kind of silence that didn't ask for filling. The autumn wind threaded through the slats of the railing, brushing against our shoulders and rustling the leaves like a soft goodbye. Red, yellow, and gold drifted around us, not falling so much as floating, like answers I'd stopped chasing. The sky was beginning to dim, but not quite yet. That long, golden pause between afternoon and evening where everything feels more honest. Between us sat 2 mugs, mostly empty. Her eyes were on the horizon. Mine were on the worn duffel bag by the steps. It was navy blue once, now more gray than anything. The embroidery was almost gone, but I could still make out the faded letters. Springfield U Orientation 2008. It had been packed, unpacked, and repacked more times than I could count. But it never made it to the dorm room it was stitched for. It had carried disappointment, dreams, hand-me-downs. Now it was holding books for a new office in Boston. Do you regret writing it? Camilla asked quietly, not looking at me. I smiled. No, I regret waiting so long to stop asking for approval. She nodded, then reached for her mug. You think they'll read it again? I think they'll try to forget it. My phone buzzed on the windowsill. Voicemail, Mom's voice. We're proud of you, even if you're not ours anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just deleted it, then tapped undo and saved it to a folder I called Truths I Needed to Hear, Just Not Today. Inside the house, boxes were stacked and labeled kitchen, office, bedroom, memory lane. That last one was a joke, but not really. I closed the last flap, taped it shut, and stood there a minute, letting the quiet fill me. Outside, Camilla locked the U-Haul. The clunk of the latch felt final in a good way. Ready? She asked, brushing her hair back from her face. For once, I said, exhaling. Yeah. The drive to the new place wasn't long. Boston always felt like it had one foot in the past, the other sprinting into whatever came next. I used to hate that. Now it felt like home. 2 days after the move, a letter arrived. No return address, just a heavy envelope tucked between junk mail and flyers. Inside, a scholarship application from a foundation I'd never heard of, and a sticky note, yellow and slightly creased, stuck to the top. Still not too late. Reyes, I sat down on the floor of my new apartment, the light falling in long rectangles across the hardwood. I didn't open the form, not yet, just held it in my hands. In the corner of the room, my journal sat, half unpacked. I pulled it into my lap, flipped to the back. There, taped neatly to the final page, was the torn check. Mom's hush money offer. I'd saved it not for value, but for clarity. Underneath it, in black ink, I'd written, my parents refused to fund my college, but I finally funded my future. No signature, no flourish, just a fact. Outside, a child's laughter echoed down the street. Leaves scratched along the pavement like the story hadn't ended, just turned a page. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't need to read ahead. I was the one writing what came next. In families, especially the ones shaped by pride and silence, It's easy to lose yourself trying to be what others need. But healing begins the moment you stop asking for permission to be who you are. Stand up for your worth, even when it's uncomfortable. Speak your truth, even when it shakes the room. And above all, remember, love without respect isn't love. And respect starts with you. If this story resonated with you or reminded you of your own journey, we invite you to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more heartfelt stories that honor real struggles and quiet victories. Explore more family tales. One of them might just speak to your heart.